Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. I am Jeff Urbin from the FDR Presidential Library and Museum down in Hyde Park, New York. So we are just happy to announce that starting last Friday, we are now open 7 days a week for 4 hours a day as we inch our way back to normalcy with the pandemic. So we're excited about that. Tonight, we're going to talk about Eleanor Roosevelt. And Eleanor Roosevelt is, of course, one of my favorite topics because I think she's a real inspiration to people, not just women, but also men. And especially one of the things I find out is that she's a real big influence and inspiration to kids. There's this program called National History Day that takes place every year, and it's a national program, and they do like themes about history. And every year, no matter what the theme is, Eleanor Roosevelt is represented by some of the kids doing research, and it's just awesome, that even 60 years after her death, folks are still tuning in to learn about her. So tonight we're going to talk about Eleanor. She would have been 137 years old last week had she taken a little bit better care of herself. No, I'm just kidding. She took pretty good doggone care of herself all the way along the line. And she lived to the ripe old age of 78. Now, the older you get, the younger that is. But she had a very, very full life. And today what I'd like to do is to talk to you a little bit about her life and talk about some things that helped shape her in a way that most folks don't realize. We all have our favorite Eleanor stories, about what she did or what she was able to accomplish and who she was and such. But did you ever wonder how she got that way? How did she become this Eleanor Roosevelt, this first lady of the country, this first lady of the world? And that's what we're going to explore a little bit tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about how she became who she was. And when people ask me, hey, if you had to pick one word to describe Eleanor Roosevelt, what would it be? I might think of the word amazing, inspiring, awesome. But tonight I want to use two words to describe her. And the two words I want to use to describe her are the word betrayal and the word compassion. Betrayal, meaning that Mrs. Roosevelt was constantly being betrayed. Betrayal was an ongoing theme in her life. She was constantly being betrayed by people that she loved and people that she trusted. And from this, she was able to build this enormous sense of compassion. So those are the two words I'd like you to keep in mind as we go through the story tonight. First, betrayal, and then we'll get to compassion. Now, Eleanor Roosevelt was born October 11th, back in 1884 in New York City, and she was born into the Roosevelt clan. She was born into the Oyster Bay side of the Roosevelt clan. We belong to the Hudson Valley Roosevelts, and she kind of belonged to the Oyster Bay Roosevelt part with Teddy Roosevelt, and we have Franklin on our side. They're related. They're the same family. They go back, Franklin and Eleanor, if you go back 5 generations, share a common ancestor. But she came from that other portion of the family. And these folks were very well connected. They had a very fancy Roosevelt name. Everybody knew and respected that name. And they had their fortune. So they were pretty well set, and they were pretty well connected in New York City. And so when Eleanor was born, her mother was kind of disappointed. Her mother didn't think she was attractive the way she should be. She didn't think she was graceful the way that she should be. And she was kind of an embarrassment to her mother, so much so that her mother gave her the nickname of Granny. Granny, because to her mother, she reminded her of a little old lady in the way that she looked and the way that she, comported herself. And that was the nickname that her mother gave her. Now, this is the first of the betrayals, right? You don't have to be a psychologist to figure out that, somebody calling you a name like Granny in a derogatory manner when you're a little girl, and especially that person being your mother, you don't have to be a psychologist to figure out that's going to have an impact on this girl's self-esteem. And in fact, it did. Rather than being called Muffin or Princess or Cupcake or Darling, Granny was not a very nice name to be called. Now, this is a picture of Eleanor Roosevelt when she is about 3 years old. And I think she's cute, right? Nothing wrong with this kid. The bangs might be a little severe. Right? They could maybe use a little softening here, but overall, not a bad looking kid, right? Cute little girl. No reason to be called Granny, but that's what her mother did. Now, her father was a neglected alcoholic. And what I mean by that is he never abused her or anything like that, but he did get neglective once he got drinking. So once he started with the booze, that became his focus, and everything else kind of faded out of his consciousness. And the story I tell about this that I think really shows this is one day he had promised Eleanor that he would take her into the city. We're going to go into New York. We're going to do whatever it is you want to do. You want to go to the park? We'll go to the park. You want to go, to a show? We'll go to a show. You want to go for a ride, on the merry-go-round? Whatever you want to do, Eleanor, it's going to be daddy-daughter day in the city, me and you. And she was really excited about this. And they get into the city. And her father says, oh, I forgot. I got to go to this meeting right here for a minute. And he puts Eleanor on the doorstep, and he goes into a hotel, and he goes into the bar of the hotel, and he proceeds to get drunk first thing in the morning. And as I said, once he gets drinking, he forgets everything else. He forgot Eleanor was outside. He got so drunk, they sent him home out the back door, and almost 2 hours later, Eleanor tugged on the doorman's jacket and said, "Hey, my daddy went in there. When's he getting out? When's he coming out? How long is this meeting going to go on? We have a big day planned." And the doorman went in, found out what happened, sent Eleanor home in a cab as well. So this is what I'm saying about being a neglective alcoholic. So here's this poor young girl. Her mother's calling her Granny. Her father is, forgetting about her because he's so tied into the alcohol and such. And by the time she's 10 years old, both her mother and her father have passed away. Her mother from diphtheria and her father from complications with alcohol. So little Eleanor is now, who didn't exactly have the greatest, role models in terms of parents up to this point, is now passed around from family member to family member among the Roosevelt clan. So she goes and she stays with one Roosevelt family member for a couple of weeks, and then, okay, Eleanor, time to move on. We're going to take you someplace else. She goes off to another family member, and she gets bounced around, never really fitting in, never really being accepted, and just sort of like a betrayal. Hey, man, this is my family. You're supposed to be taking me in. My parents are dead. Somebody's got to help me out here. And they would take her in, but only for a limited time only. And this happened all across the family. Finally, she ends up in Tivoli, right? You guys are all familiar with that. I do these programs all around the country, so a lot of times folks aren't. But she ends up in Tivoli at her Grandma Hall's house. And Grandma Hall was her mother's mother. And Grandma Hall had a very strict husband who had passed away. But Granny Hall had picked up where he left off. And, she was very religious. And, if you've got time to do something, you should be reading the Bible. And, no music except on Sundays, and very strict rules there in the household. So if Eleanor was asked to set the table and inadvertently put the spoon on the wrong side or the fork on the wrong side, her grandmother would get very angry, and then sometimes give her the cold shoulder for 3 or 4 days at a time. Right? So this is not a loving environment that she's being brought up in once again. But to make matters worse, she had 2 alcoholic uncles who were living in the house as well. And what these guys would do is they would get drunk in the afternoon. They would go up to the attic. They would open the windows in the attic, and they would fire rifles at people who passed by the property. And they would fire rifles at Eleanor. So if Eleanor was out at the potting shed, potting her plants, finished it, put it over here. When she turned to get the next one, they would shoot the one she just did, just to see her jump, just to scare her. Same thing if she was with her horse. If she'd gone out for a ride, it was then petting her horse and, giving him the wash down and everything after the walk, they might shoot into the bucket of water or shoot into the bale of hay just to see the horse jump, just to see Eleanor jump. And this to them was great sport. Well, she's 15 years old at this point, and Granny Hall says, "This is not good. This is not a good situation here. We gotta get her out of here." So she packs her up and she sends her off to Allen Wood School. And it's at Allen Wood School over in England that Eleanor meets this woman, Madame Silvestri. And Madame Silvestri is the first person to see in Eleanor Roosevelt what the rest of us will see later on. Madame Silvestri is the first person to say to Eleanor Roosevelt, "Speak your mind. What are you thinking? What do you got going on? What do you want to say? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? How do you feel about these issues and these other issues? And if you have a feeling about an issue, challenge one of the other girls at the school. Argue with them. Tell them, hey, here's what I think. What do you think? And then tell them why they're wrong for what they think, and tell them why you're right for what you think." And she begins to encourage Eleanor to develop this sense of self that she hasn't developed up to this point. So much so that Eleanor keeps this picture of Madame Silvestri on her desk for the rest of her life, right? For the rest of her life. So far, Eleanor has been betrayed by her mother, who doesn't think she's cute enough, her father, who puts alcohol in importance before her, her extended family, who are more than happy to take her in, but for a limited time only, from her grandma, who's happy to have her there so long as she can ride shotgun over her, and these two alcoholic uncles who think it's fun to shoot at her. So this has not been a very good childhood up to this point. But when she meets Madame Silvestri, things begin to change. And she later says, Eleanor, that the 3 years she spent with Madame Silvestri from 15 to 18 were the happiest years of her life. When she finishes Allen Wood School, she comes back to the United States, and she goes back to New York, and she begins to work in a tenement house because Madame Silvestri had, taught her, hey, you know what? You're a Roosevelt. You've got it pretty good. I mean, I know you've had issues with your family and stuff, but a lot of people don't live the way you do. A lot of people don't have those connections. A lot of people don't have that money. So why don't you see what you can do to help people who don't? And Eleanor took this to heart, and she went to work in a tenement in New York City. And she later brings Franklin Roosevelt there to see how those people are living. Now, while she's in New York, this is what she looks like when she comes back, right? And I think she's beautiful here. This is a really nice picture. Okay, so now her mother's gone by this point, so she's not able to see that Eleanor has turned out to be this lovely young woman. Okay, but she's come a long way from Granny to being this young woman here. And this is the time that Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt fall in love. Eleanor has come back from Allen Wood School. She's working in a tenement house. She's getting ready to make her big debut out in the New York social life. And her one of the relatives, one of the family relatives, invites her to Madison Square Garden to see a horse show. And the person who invited her happened to be Franklin Roosevelt's older half-brother, Rosie Roosevelt, who had a box in Madison Square Garden, and he would periodically invite members of the family to come and spend some time and watch the horse shows and those sorts of things. One particular night, he happened to invite his younger brother, Franklin, and his cousin, Eleanor, and they got there and they fell in love. They fell in love. Now, I say they fell in love, but they had known each other throughout their entire lives. They'd first met when Franklin was 4 and Eleanor was 2, because the Roosevelts are very famous for these big family reunions, between the two sides of the two sides of the clan. And so Franklin and Eleanor had kind of known each other growing up here and there. But it's not until Franklin discovers, Eleanor when she's 19 years old, and she's got some new confidence from Madame Silvestri, and she takes his heart, and he takes her heart as well. And this is really a wonderful thing. People tend to forget, because a lot is made of this idea that the Roosevelts, had this working relationship and, it wasn't really a marriage and all that. That's not true. When they first fell in love, they were deeply in love. In fact, Franklin's nickname for Eleanor was my angel. So again, a long way from Granny. And what was nice about this relationship with these two is that they complemented each other perfectly. And in fact, I would argue that in some ways they were two halves of a perfect whole. And what I mean by that is where Franklin was kind of, flitty and, happy-go-lucky and, not very, well-read. I mean, he would read what he wanted to read, but, he didn't have much interest other than the things that he was interested in. Eleanor couldn't wait to read things. She was always reading new things. She was very introspective. She was very shy still and timid. Even though Madame Silvestri had helped bring her out of her shell, she wasn't completely out of there yet. So where Franklin was kind of, happy-go-lucky and, sort of superficial, Eleanor would help to sort of bring him down. And where Eleanor was, kind of shy and bookish and scary, not scary, but scared of going out to things. She found things scary. Franklin kind of brought her up. And so they were the perfect complement to each other. They filled the voids that each other had. And they decided they were going to get married. And Franklin asked Eleanor to marry him, and he went and told his mother, and he said, "Hey, Mom, guess what? I'm going to marry Eleanor Roosevelt." And his mother said, "Eleanor Roosevelt? Oh, that's great. Let's just keep it quiet for a year, shall we?" And he said, "Well, what do you mean? Well, let's just keep it. We'll just sit on it for a year, right?" Now, what Sarah, Franklin's mother, was hoping was that the two kids would fall out of love and break up. And it wasn't that she didn't like Eleanor. She knew Eleanor, for her whole life, but she didn't want any competition for Franklin's attention. That's what she did not want. And I love this picture of Sarah and Eleanor because I think it tells you everything you need to know about their relationship. So here's Sarah, right? She's got a nice straight backbone here. She's looking Eleanor right in the eye, and she's got this book. And I don't really know what that book is, but I like to think of it as the Roosevelt family rule book. So it's almost like here's the matriarch, and she's standing there all so full and sure of herself, and she's got the book, the Roosevelt family rule book, and she's reading it to young Eleanor, who, as you can see, has got her neck crooked here. She's not looking Sarah in the eye, and her hands are clasped in desperation, as Sarah is kind of reading her the rule book. So here's Eleanor kind of like, "Oh, okay, yes, and that was kind of the relationship that these guys had. So here you are, this young 19-year-old woman, right? You finally begin to find yourself. You want to shout from the rooftops that you're in love. You've got this guy that's like the other half of you, and he's calling you my angel, and you want to shout it from the rooftops, and your future mother-in-law says, sit on it for a year. In fact, she even takes Franklin, Sarah does, to the Caribbean for a 6-week cruise, hoping he will forget about Eleanor, which he doesn't. So the year goes by, and this is another sort of a betrayal, right? Because, you're a young woman. You want to just, you're so happy. You finally found happiness, and you want to shout it from the rooftops. But this other woman is telling you, hey, keep it quiet for a year. Well, the year goes by, and they get married. And they decide they're going to get married, and Eleanor has to have somebody walk her down the aisle. Well, by this point, her father's dead, right? So she's got nobody to do it. So she asks her favorite uncle. And her favorite uncle happens to be none other than Teddy Roosevelt, right? Her father's brother. And Teddy says, hey, you know what? I'm going to be in New York on March 17th. I got to come in for the St. Patrick's Day parade. I'll come in, I'll go to the parade, I'll swing over, I'll walk you down the aisle, get back to the parade, everything will be great. Everybody, they won't even know I'm gone, and, it'll be a wonderful, wonderful time. And so Eleanor says, oh, that's great. Thank you so much. So thank you. And this is a picture of Eleanor in her wedding dress. Now, we don't have any pictures of her at her wedding because they didn't have a photographer. But here she is. This is a dress that was bought for her by her aunts. They pitched in and bought the dress because, her mother was gone. And here she is trying this on in January of 1905 in anticipation of the wedding, which is going to take place in March 17th, 1905. Now, what happens is Uncle Teddy shows up. All of a sudden, everybody forgets about Eleanor, right? At your wedding, you're the bride. You're supposed to be the center of attention. But Teddy Roosevelt blusters in, and he takes away all the attention from the young couple and all the attention away from Eleanor. And his daughter, Alice, once said that her father liked to be the corpse at every funeral and the bride at every wedding. He just loved to get attention. And so it was a sort of a betrayal, because on the day she should have been the center of attention, she was playing a bit part in her own wedding on account of Uncle Teddy. Now, she learns a very valuable lesson there, and we'll get back to that in a couple of minutes. But nonetheless, it's not a happy and fun time for her. Well, they go to Europe for 3 months on a honeymoon, right? Nice to have the money to do that. So off they go. And while they're over there, Sarah says, well, gee, I got to buy the kids a wedding gift, and I got to get them something for Christmas too. Hey, I know, I'll combine the two. So she goes to New York, buys a townhouse, has it taken apart, builds another townhouse in its place, and it's still there. It's part of Hunter College. If you look at it from the street, there's one door. You open that door, you go in, you're in a small vestibule with two doors. One door led to a 6-story apartment for Franklin and Eleanor, and the other door led to a 6-story apartment for Sarah, with connecting doors on various floors with the locks on Sarah's side, so that she could pop in on the newlyweds anytime she wanted. So she says, well, gee, what should I get the kids? I know. How about a townhouse where I can live right next door? And this is another betrayal, because what this is it robs Eleanor her opportunity to own her own house, to have her own house. She was looking forward to coming back from the honeymoon in Europe, finding a house with Franklin, and this was going to be her very first true home, because she had been bounced around, she lived in a dorm, that sort of thing. And now this opportunity to pick a house with her husband has been taken away, and it's been dictated to her basically that this is the apartment you're going to live in New York City. And that's the way that was. So again, a little bit of a betrayal. And what could she do, right? She had Sarah. You can't say, oh gee, thanks for all the trouble, but I'm not living here, right? So she had to go ahead and do that. So they end up getting married. They move into that apartment. Franklin begins his political career, and he spends his time halfway between, sometimes in Dutchess County, sometimes in New York. He goes to Albany as a state senator. And while he is in the state senate up there, Eleanor moves up there with him as well. They have an apartment up there, and it puts some distance between her and Sarah, which is a good thing. Although while they're up there, Franklin gets tangled up in the big political machine up there, the Democratic political machine, and he puts Woodrow Wilson's name in nomination for the presidency. And when Woodrow Wilson wins and becomes president of the United States, he rewards Franklin Roosevelt by appointing him to be Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Now, by now, they're starting to have children. The family is growing. They move from Albany and Hyde Park down into Washington, D.C. Now, Eleanor was kind of timid around her children. She didn't have a good role model as a mother. So she didn't really know how to be a mother, or certainly not how to be, a good mother. And so she was kind of shy and timid and sort of let the nanny and the nurses take care of the kids. And Sarah saw this, sensing the void. She stepped in and said, hey, I've already raised the perfect child, Franklin. I know what I'll do. I will help raise Eleanor and Franklin's children as well. So she begins to take kind of a domineering role in the raising of the children as well. So now Eleanor's opportunity to discover how to be a mother is, kind of, truncated and betrayed once again. She can't even raise her own kids. Well, Franklin's job as Assistant Secretary of the Navy has two parts. One part is he has to travel all around the world to the American naval bases to check out the ships, to check out the sailors, check out the ports, make sure everything's running smooth, right? And when he's doing this, of course, Eleanor primarily stays home and helps with the children. When he is in town, what Franklin does is he has to go to all of the various cocktail parties around Washington, D.C., in order to rub elbows with, the rich and famous and the mucky mucks to keep the money coming in, for the Navy. Well, he takes Eleanor to these cocktail parties, and she absolutely hates them. She hates them. She doesn't like alcohol, right? She's got an alcoholic dad, alcoholic uncles. She doesn't like to be around alcohol. And she is still kind of shy, timid. And, she doesn't, like to make small talk with people. And, she's just, that's not her scene. So finally she says to him, listen, I can't go anymore. You're going to have to, you're going to have to go alone. And he says, I can't go alone. That's, how's that going to look, right? I got to go with somebody. And so she said, well, how about Lucy Mercer, my social secretary? Dun, 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 dun. Lucy Mercer is a beautiful woman. She's a lot of fun at a cocktail party. She knows how to hold her liquor, and she ends up falling in love with Franklin Roosevelt. But what's worse, he ends up falling in love with her, and they begin to have an affair. Now, we don't know exactly when the affair began, but we do know when it ended. It ended at the end of the First World War. Franklin Roosevelt comes home from Europe after inspecting the ports over there, and he's got a touch of the flu. The pneumonia, and they're afraid it's going to become the flu, the big pandemic flu. So he says, all right, I don't feel so well. I'm going upstairs, and he brings all his stuff in. He leaves it in the lobby of the house in New York. He goes upstairs, goes to bed, and Eleanor begins to unpack his suitcases. And when she's doing that, she finds a satchel of love letters between Franklin and Lucy Mercer. Well, she reads just enough of these love letters to say, well, first she says, well, she felt like the bottom of her world fell out, right? Here's the other half of the hole now betraying her by cheating on her with her social secretary. Here's her social secretary betraying her by cheating with her husband, right? And so she goes to Franklin and she says, listen, if you love this woman as much as these letters seem to indicate, you need to be with her, not with me. And she offers Franklin a divorce. Now, he doesn't take it, and he doesn't take it for two reasons. Number one is that his political advisor, Louis Howe, says, you can't get a divorce. If you get a divorce, your political career is over, right? If you can't run a marriage, how are you going to run a state? How are you going to run a country? Your political career is done. Right? Keep in mind, it wasn't until Ronald Reagan that we had our very first divorced president. The second person who weighed in on this was Sarah. And Sarah said, no. You found her, you fell in love with her, you married her, and you cheated on her. So now you have to make it right. And there'll be no divorce in this family. If you decide to divorce Eleanor, I will cut you off from the Roosevelt family fortune. Now, Sarah maintained control of the Roosevelt family fortune until she died in November of 1941. And Franklin died in April of 1945. So he was only in control of the family fortune for 4 years. So it's at this point that lovey-dovey, my angel kind of marriage where there's two halves of the whole breaks apart and it becomes like two pistons working side by side with each other, both working for the same thing, both working in the same direction, both looking to accomplish the same kinds of goals, but not the lovey-dovey tender that it had been prior to that. Now, I happen to think, and this is based upon a lot of research and a lot of observation, but I tend to think that they remained in love. They still did love each other, but Eleanor was so heartbroken by Franklin cheating on her that she just couldn't forgive him. She just could never forgive him fully. Now, back in those days, and this is not an excuse or I'm not belittling what happened, but back in those days, if the guy cheated on the woman, it was kind of like, well, boys will be boys, and the women were expected to look the other way. Not Eleanor. No. We're the two halves of the whole. You're cheating on me. That changes the dynamic, pal, from here on in. And that's exactly what happened. Now, Franklin says, hey, I promise I'll never see this woman again. Let's stay together. Let's, work it out. We'll make the best of this. And, I'll be a better husband. And that's the way they proceed. Now, here's a little story that I want to pick up from a couple minutes ago. Remember I said that at her wedding, March 17th, 1905, Eleanor learned a valuable lesson? Well, the lesson comes back in Easter time of 1939. There was a woman by the name of Marian Anderson who happened to be an African-American singer. And she was scheduled to sing at Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. Marian Anderson happens to be good friends with Eleanor Roosevelt. When Eleanor Roosevelt finds out that they won't let Marian Anderson sing at Constitution Hall because she's Black and it's a segregated venue, right? We don't have Black performers here. Eleanor Roosevelt said, you know, that's ridiculous. Who's sponsoring this thing? And it turned out to be the Daughters of the American Revolution, the DAR. And Eleanor Roosevelt happened to be a member of the DAR, and she resigned her membership in the DAR in protest of Marian Anderson not being allowed to sing at Constitution Hall. Well, 6 weeks later, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, Marian Anderson gave a concert. And that concert was on Easter Sunday, 1939, and 75,000 people attended, way more than ever would have seen her at Constitution Hall. And a very famous person was invited and chose not to go. And that very famous person was Eleanor Roosevelt, Marian Anderson's friend. Now you might think, well, wait a minute, if they're buds, you know, they're friends, why won't she go to this concert? She doesn't go because she remembers back to her wedding day. March 17th, 1905, Uncle Teddy, the big celebrity, stole all the attention at her wedding. And Eleanor knows that, hey, I'm the first lady of the United States. Guess what? You know, if I go to this concert, the headlines are going to be Eleanor Roosevelt attends concert by some African-American woman, we don't know, right? So she wanted Marian Anderson to have that moment in the sun and to be the star, to be the center of attention. And I love that story about Eleanor Roosevelt because it tells you who she was. She looked for an opportunity to pay back that lesson. She looked for an opportunity to apply that lesson. And it took her from March 17th, 1905 to Easter Sunday, 1939. That is the kind of person Eleanor Roosevelt was. She had these life lessons and she looked to apply them. So here we are, Eleanor Roosevelt, betrayed by her mother who doesn't think she's cute enough, betrayed by her father who puts the bottle before his allegiance to taking care of her, betrayed by extended members of the family who'll take her in, but for a limited time only, betrayed by her grandma who says, yeah, you can live here, but it's not going to be fun. Betrayed by two uncles who sit in the attic and shoot at her. She goes off to Allenwood School. There she meets Madame Silvestri, who takes an interest in her for the first time. You know, anybody really takes an interest in her. She comes back. She reestablishes contact with Franklin Roosevelt. She falls in love with him. And she's betrayed by her future mother-in-law, who says, great, that's good, go ahead, you know, get married, but keep it quiet for a year, and we're not going to get, you know, we're not going to tell anybody for, we're not going to get married for a year, we're just going to sit on this for a year. Then Franklin, goes off on these business trips and things, leaving her homes where she's kind of have to sort of make her own way with the kids and Sarah. She's betrayed a bit by Sarah, Sarah taking the lion's share of taking care of the kids at that point. And then when Franklin goes off to the cocktail parties, what does he do? Well, he takes Lucy Mercer, the other woman. And she's betrayed by her social secretary, which is what the job Lucy Mercer had, and by her husband. Well, we fast forward, and now they're president, right? He's president, she's first lady. And what ends up happening is he goes on this trip to Yalta, where he's trying to get Stalin and Churchill to agree with the post-war period and how everything was going to be set up and run. And so he travels 40,000 miles. He comes back to the United States. He addresses Congress from a sitting down position. The first time he does that, right, because he's got polio. Ordinarily, he locks his leg braces and stands at the podium and talks. But this time, too tired to do that. He's sitting down, gives the speech to Congress, and then heads off down to Warm Springs, Georgia. He gets down to Warm Springs, Georgia, and he has a convalescent hospital down there, basically, that he had purchased to help, recuperate from the polio that he had, and he helped other patients do that. And whenever he went to Warm Springs, he always regained his energy, recharged his batteries, and got better. This time, his luck ran out. And while he was there, he had a cerebral hemorrhage. Well, Eleanor's back in Washington. They pick up the phone. They say, Mrs. Roosevelt, the president's fainted. He's fainted, and she said, well, I know he's very tired. Keep me posted. Let me know if anything changes. And, just, keep me up on how he's doing. A few hours later, the phone rings again. Mrs. Roosevelt, the president is dead. He's had a stroke. So she gets going. She runs down to Warm Springs, Georgia. She gets there and she says, okay, I want to know everything that was going on. What happened? What happened? Where was he? What was he doing? Who was he with? What was going on? And they say, well, he was sitting over there getting a portrait painted by Madame Shumatoff. And he was sitting over there next to Lucy Mercer. And Eleanor goes, what? Who? Lucy Mercer? He'd promised he would never see her again. And he kept that promise for many years, but he went back on it. So now she's betrayed by her husband once again and by her social secretary once again. But wait, it gets even worse. So she says, how did this happen? How did these two get reconnected? What's going on? He promised he would never see her again. How did this happen? And her own daughter, Anna, Eleanor's daughter, her only daughter, said, Mama, I got something I got to tell you. I'm the one that got them back together. And she's like, what? How could you do that? And, you know what the history of these two were. You know what this is. You know what this does to me. You know what this. And she says, Mom, please, please. When you're president, everybody that comes through that door wants something. They want you to make a campaign appearance. They want you to put something in the budget for their congressional district. They want you to, sign a law or something. Everybody wants something from you when you're president. Papa needed to be with people he could be himself with. Not, Franklin Roosevelt, President of the United States, but just good old Franklin Roosevelt. And that's how he could be when he was with Lucy Mercer. And Eleanor looked her in the eye and she said, you know something? You're right. That's a good thing you did for Papa. That was a good thing. And she forgave her, right? I mean, for crying out loud, if that was my kid, it'd be all right. No allowance, no TV, no ice cream, go to your room, you're out of the will, all the rest of that sort of stuff. But Eleanor Roosevelt forgave her. This is who Eleanor Roosevelt was. She took the betrayal from her parents, from her family, from her friends, from her husband, from associates, from her children, all these people. And rather than let it turn to bitterness and ugliness, she turned it into compassion. She understood what it was like to be on the outside looking in. So when she did work for women, for people of color, for children, for migrants, for refugees, for immigrants, for workers, and the list goes on. She understood the pain they were feeling. She understood that they were being betrayed in having the rights and the opportunities that were, entitled to them. And she couldn't live with that. She had to jump in and make something happen. She had to jump in and do something for them. That was the compassion that she had. She felt their pain because she felt her own pain throughout her entire life. Now, I'd like to conclude by just reading a couple of paragraphs from a eulogy that was given for Mrs. Roosevelt by Adlai Stevenson in November of 1962 when she passed away. Adlai Stevenson was her good friend, and they were associates at the United Nations, and Adlai Stevenson ran for the presidency 2 times, and Mrs. Roosevelt endorsed him and worked for that. But when she passed away, he said, and I quote, this is at her funeral, she lived 78 years, most of the time in tireless activity, as if she knew that only a frail fragment of the things that cry out to be done could be done in the lifetime of even the most fortunate. One has the melancholy sense that when she knew death was at hand, she was contemplating not what she'd achieved, but what she'd not quite managed to do. And I know that she wanted to go when there was no more strength to do. Yet how much she had done, how much still unchronicled. We dare not try to tabulate the lives that she salvaged, the battles known and unrecorded that she fought, the afflicted she comforted, the hovels she brightened, the faces and places near and far that were given some new radiance, some sound of music by her endeavors. What other single human being has touched and transformed the existence of so many others? What better measure is there of the impact of anyone's life? There was no sick soul too wounded to engage her mercy. There was no signal of human distress which she did not view as a personal summons. There was no affront to human dignity from which she fled because the timid cried danger. And the number of occasions on which her intervention turned despair into victory, we may never know. Her life was crowded, restless, fearless. Perhaps she pitied most not those whom she aided in the struggle, but the more fortunate who were preoccupied with themselves and cursed with the self-deceptions of private success. She walked in the slums and ghettos of the world, not on a tour of inspection, nor as a condescending patron, but as one who could not feel complacent while others were hungry, and who could not find contentment while others were in distress. This was not sacrifice. This, for Mrs. Roosevelt, was the only meaningful way of life. And I don't think anybody could sum it up better than that. So let's open it up to some Q&A.
Thank you, Jeff. If anybody has, sorry, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. If you have any questions, you can either put it in the chat button or the chat box or the question and answer box. And I don't see any yet.
Anybody, any questions, comments, snide remarks? Okay, what I've been trying to do tonight is to give you some insight into how she became who she was. We've seen the movies, we've read the books, we know the story, but how was she able to do all that? And it was just this incredible self-strength, this incredible taking all that hardship and turning it into goodness. Talk about taking lemonades or lemons and turning it into lemonade. Mrs. Roosevelt was an expert lemonade maker. I want to share with you two.
There is a question.
Oh, okay, great.
Where in Tivoli was the house that she lived or visited?
It's on Northwoods Road, which is it's between the heart of Tivoli and heading up toward Montgomery Place, Livingston area up there.
Did FDR recognize how domineering his mother was and how much she tried to control Eleanor?
Oh yeah, he totally recognized it. And he not only recognized it, he lived it, right? He knew what it was like to have this domineering mother. She was the same with him. She was the same with everyone. He had learned how to sort of use her a bit and how to play her a bit to get what he wanted. Eleanor, it took her a long time to learn how to do that. And as she got older, and became Eleanor Roosevelt, the legend, it became a little easier for her to deal with Sarah. They still didn't always get along very well. But Eleanor finally got to a point where she said, hey, you know what? I'm Eleanor Roosevelt, right? I can't please this woman. No matter what I do, she's not going to be happy. So guess what? I'm just going to do what I feel like I need to do. And she's just going to have to, she was just going to have to live with it. And so that's the way they ended up. Going about their relationship again from that point. Biographies of Mrs. Roosevelt. Well, I think my favorite biographies of Mrs. Roosevelt are her autobiographies, because she really takes a great deep look at herself, a great deep hard look at herself, and she is very tough on herself, and feels kind of like the eulogy, she feels like she could have done more, she should have done this, she should have done that, even though she did everything that she could. So I would definitely take a look at her autobiographies. And then if you're interested in a really great book that tells sort of the relationship of the two back and forth, it's Doris Kearns' No Ordinary Time. And the title comes from a speech that Mrs. Roosevelt gave at the Democratic National Convention when she placed Franklin Roosevelt's name in nomination for the third term. She said, ordinarily, it wouldn't be a good idea for a president to be president for 3 terms. Washington knew what he was talking about, get some new blood in there. But she said, but that would be in ordinary times. And these are no ordinary times. And then she goes forth and she lays out all the reasons why Franklin Roosevelt should be nominated for a 3rd term. And in fact, run for the 3rd term. So I would suggest you start with that, her autobiographies, and then the Doris Kearns book. Let's see. Yes. What did her children end up doing? Oh, great question. The children, there were 6 children altogether. 5 lived to be adults. One of them died as a baby. And the children get a bum rap. The children are kind of seen as sort of not really amounting to much, and it's not really a fair assessment. 3 of them ended up going into politics. One was the mayor of Miami. 2 were in the Congress. They had successful businesses. They did some writing, but the problem was that you've got Franklin Roosevelt as your father and Eleanor Roosevelt as your mother. And they were always being held to those measures, and so they were never really able to live up to, to that mantle. They also had a lot of relationship problems. There were 19 marriages among the 5 children that lived to be adults. So imagine that, right? And people, they couldn't tell, are people coming to me because of who I am, or are people coming to me because of who I am, Franklin and Eleanor's, son or daughter. So it was always very hard for them to sort of, figure out what people's motives were when they were coming to them and such. But I always chuckle about that because, Sarah said, oh, there'll be no divorce in this family. I don't know, next generation, 19. So you could argue that either they really believed in marriage because they kept going at it, or they had some relationship struggles, which I think is closer to the truth. Were they together when he got polio? They weren't together when he contracted polio. They were together when he showed the symptoms. So polio takes about 2 weeks. Kind of like the same thing with this COVID thing. You get exposed and you got to wait 14 days to see what happens. And that's exactly what happened with the polio. So they were way up at Campobello on a little island between the United States and Canada when the polio struck. And so they were together at that point, and she took very, very good care of him. They were out in the middle of nowhere, no good doctors. The doctor was, that was there on the island was basically, part doctor, part dentist, part, horseman, jack of all trade kind of things. So Eleanor took a great deal of care of Franklin at that time, and was really a big help to him. Anything else? Some nice compliments. Thank you. The speaker's only as good as their audience, so kudos to you people. Let's see. So I want to share with you 2 of my favorite.
Jeff, we've got a question here that says, would you say that she found happiness in her life? This is in the questions.
Yeah, would I say she found happiness in her life? I would say she found a level of happiness in her life. It was probably for her more contentment than happiness. I think she always felt she could do more. I think she always felt she should do more. And I think she felt that other people felt she should be doing more. And this goes back to her parents, and especially her mother. She really wanted to help people. She really wanted to please people. And I don't think that she ever felt, no matter what she did for somebody, that she could have done enough. I mean, she would love to, she didn't go to that concert for Marian Anderson, which gave Marian Anderson her moment in the sun, but she would have loved to have waved her magic wand and make prejudice go away, but she wasn't able to do that. So I think she was content. I think she found a level of comfort, but I don't know if I'd ever say really happiness, which is sad, but she made the best of what she could, and boy, she did a damn good job doing it, if you ask me. All right, so let me share with you 2 of my favorite Eleanor quotes. And I always share these with the students when they come in. The first is, Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "You don't have to become a hero overnight." And I love that quote because it gives you permission to fail. Eleanor Roosevelt did not become a hero overnight. As we saw tonight, it was a lifelong battle from the time she was a baby all the way on up to, the time she passed away. She did not become a hero overnight. And she didn't expect anybody else to either. And I like to share that with the students because it gives them permission to fail. So if you go out there, excuse me, and you try to do something, and you try to help somebody, or you try to make something better, or you try, something in your career or whatever, and it doesn't work, that's okay. Find out what happened and pick up the pieces and start over again, right? Mrs. Roosevelt was a firm believer in if you screw up, fess up, clean up, and move on. So you don't have to become a hero overnight. If you make a mistake, if you make an error, if you find yourself being hypocritical, catch yourself, correct yourself, and learn from that experience and make yourself a better person. And I love that quote because, again, it gives the young people, it gives them a little bit of wiggle room in what it is that they're trying to do. The other quote that I love from Eleanor Roosevelt was, she said that she was talking about human rights, and she said, human rights begins in small places, so small they can't be seen on a map or on a globe. And what that means is you don't have to be First Lady of the United States or First Lady of the world. You don't have to be a king or a president or a prime minister or an athlete or a movie star to make the world a better place. You can begin doing it right where you are. Human rights begins in small places, so small you can't see them on a map. They begin in our homes. They begin in our communities. They begin in our places of worship. They begin in our workplaces. All the places that we are every single day. If we can show a little more compassion, if we can show a little more openness, if we can show a little more, of caring for each other, then the world becomes a better place right where you are. And you've got the power to do that. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to be well connected. You can make an impact in somebody's life just by doing that. And that's what she meant, and that's awesome too, because it gives the kids power. Like, okay, kid, you know what? You don't have to change the world. Change the way you behave at recess. Go home and make your bed like your mother told you to do, right? And the world becomes a better place with those small, teeny, tiny actions. And if you're doing it and I'm doing it and she's doing it and he's doing it, it's all becoming a better situation for all of us. And, it's just so wonderful that she left us with those. I mean, she had thousands of quotes, but I love those two because I think they give you permission to fail, but they also make a challenge that you need to take care of where you're going and what you're doing right where you are.
Jeff, we have one more question. It says,
okay.
What would be considered her one most famous feat?
Her one most famous feat is probably creating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the United Nations. She was put on, President Roosevelt had this vision of the United Nations that goes all the way back to Woodrow Wilson, who was one of his heroes, and the idea of a League of Nations. So that didn't work. So FDR wanted to create a United Nations, and he was going to, the first meeting of the United Nations was going to take place 2 weeks before he died. So he died 2 weeks before the first meeting, and he was working on a speech and everything, and he died and didn't make it to San Francisco. So Harry Truman said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to appoint Mrs. Roosevelt to be part of the United Nations, because she, again, was that two sides, right? The piston kind of thing. She understood what he wanted out of that United Nations. And Truman understood that, you couldn't pick a better person to carry on that vision and that idea. And so they made her the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission. And it created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was unanimously passed by the United Nations. And this is at a time right after the Second World War. So what she's doing is she's defining the rights, and she's working with a committee, but she's the driving force behind this thing. She's working with this committee to lay out the rights that people have, right? That no matter where you are on the planet, if you're a human being, these are the rights you have. And if you read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there's 31 points, and it includes things like you have a right to education, you have a right to travel, you have a right to marry who you want to marry, you have a right to citizenship in a country, you have a right to give up that citizenship and create citizenship in another country, and it goes on and on and on for 31 points. And although it is an ideal in terms of, it doesn't it doesn't happen every day automatically, but it gives us something to aspire to, just like our own Declaration of Independence, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Not everybody has that, but if we hold that out as a goal, like me losing 15 pounds, right? If we have that as a goal, it gives us something to work for. And if you've got that goal and you're working toward that, it gives you a direction and a way that you can channel your energies. And, you know, lo and behold, without a goal, you're not going to reach it. If you have a goal, there's a chance you're going to get there. And so I think that was her greatest, you know, accomplishment. I think she felt that that was her greatest accomplishment as well. Anything else? Okie dokie. Well, thank you all for joining in tonight, sticking with me. Sorry that we had to move it from last week. Eleanor Roosevelt, what an incredible person, you know, absolutely incredible person. A lot of life lessons we can learn from her. And, you know, I always find, you know, when it was one time I gave this this talk, and something, oh, you know, don't you feel bad telling all these secrets about it? It's like, well, they're not secrets, you know, you know, she talked about most of the stuff in her work over the course of her life. And I don't think it harms her. I think it makes, you know, at least to my way of thinking, it makes her all the more superhuman and all the more real because, you know, she was walking the walk and talking the talk. And she did that, you know, her entire life. And that's a great example for all of us. So I will see you the next time Toby has me in for a talk, which I hope will be soon. And you guys are a great audience. Thanks so much for the wonderful comments and the nice compliments and such. And we'll see you again next time.
Thank you, Jeff. I believe the next one is going to be November 8th, and it's going to be about FDR as wartime president, correct? Yes.
As a wartime president, yes. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And
November 8th.
Yes, and if anybody had more than one person attending, if you could just write that in the chat for us, that helps us to know how many people were actually here tonight. Thank you so much.
Good idea. All right, guys, take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.